Dr. Margaret Tarampi. Welcome to the Neuroarchitect.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you. Please tell us more about your career path and the motivations behind your focus on embodied spatial intelligence.
Oh, yeah. I think so I'm trained as an architect, and I think over many years, or when I started architecture school, I was really interested in how architecture affects human experience. And so I would say that I didn't necessarily, or I definitely did not arrive to this area of focus um, initially. Kind of emerged over the years, um, asking questions about how does the mind and the body and the environment um, interrelate and um, co-create, I guess, experience for humans. And and so when I was in architecture school, I was really interested in trying to understand that relationship. And I started taking classes in psychology and in architectural history, um, just trying to see what I can learn from those perspectives, and then add that lens to my architectural education. And um, I think eventually I realized that I really needed to pursue the sciences in order to better understand those initial questions that I had. So my uh, background over time is in visual cognition, in kind of motor behavior, spatial thinking, and um, what I've really seen is that when people think about or talk about or act in space, that um, it's embodied, right? They're not just ignoring, or they're not you know uh, the environment has a strong effect on the ways that they remember, or the ways that they problem solve, the ways that they interact with others. And that led me to thinking more about what are these differences, or can we define, or how can we understand the ways in which people um, experience our environment, both I think the natural and the built environment, and how does that affect our cognition and our thinking. So
When you were a student, was there someone who inspired you to think of all this, or it was like something you have always thought of?
my grandparents were principals in elementary schools. My other grandmother was a teacher as well. And so I was actually very torn going to architecture school, because I had a very naive understanding of architecture. I thought of it maybe initially as kind of a selfish pursuit, but I think one of my professors early on said, we're spending the majority of our time in the built environment. You can't help but think that it's affecting us. And that idea is really where I hung on to that, because I was like, oh, that is a very good point. And so that kind of permeated my undergraduate um, college experience in architecture, is to try to really understand that aspect of it. Like, how is the built environment, how is the environment affecting us? And so after I graduated from undergrad, was thinking, oh, maybe I'll go back to school for psychology or sociology or anthropology. All of those felt like the right direction for what I was interested in. Um, but I uh, thankfully was, you know, doing these informational interviews with different people to try to understand, um, like, what are my career path could be. And someone at my university suggested I speak to John Eberhard. And at the time, John was the director of research at the National American Institute of Architects in DC, and he was studying at that time neuroscience and architecture. He was doing work with neuroscientists at NIH, the National Institutes of Health, and with the General Services Administration, which is a federal agency in the United States that is in charge of all of the federal buildings in the United States. Um, and so I set up an interview with him, and I thought it was just informational. And when I got there and we were talking, it was clear that it wasn't an informational interview. He was hiring, well, I think he was hiring me for a job that I didn't know about or had prepared for.
Oh,
Um, and yes, and so it was great luck on my part, I think, to be able to be connected with John very early in my career and be thinking about neuroscience and architecture at that stage. So that was 2001.
mm,
Um, and it, since that time, a lot has changed in the field of architecture. A lot has changed in the field of neuroscience. And right now, where we have so much knowledge about how about brain processes, and at the same time, we have so much technology that is now available widely and to the public that allows us to ask more questions or different questions. And certainly in architecture, there is I think, huge shift back to being more human centered and wanting to have this approach to architecture that starts with and includes the people that we're designing for. And that those changes together at this time, I think, is creating such an amazing moment for neuroscience and architecture. And having seen it from the beginning till now is really pretty exciting. And my small part of it, I think, is as someone who is trained as an architect and trained as a cognitive psychologist, cognitive neuroscientist, to kind of be able to come from both lenses, understand both the kind of scientific method and also the design process, and be able to ask questions that kind of intersect in ways that will hopefully have profound effects on the way that we practice architecture and the ways in which we think about the brain by including the environment now as a variable when most of the time we try to kind of control for it so that it's not a variable.
it's as if people wanted to have evidence-based design. They wanted to prove the old ways, let's say, of having the human as a center in architecture. And I followed the same path as you. Actually, I started with architecture and then I went to psychology courses and sociology. And then I thought, like, we need to quantify also the results. Like, we need to have both methods in the research, like qualitative and also quantitative, to measure what's happening in the body, in the skin, in the brain, in our organs, to see how it's reacting to the environment and not only what we say, because sometimes what we say is not what we have in our unconscious and how our body functions. So it really depends on social psychology sometimes, the way we express what we feel. And sometimes it doesn't, relate. So it's a very um encouraging way for architects now to see that also they are contributing to the well-being of people, and it's not just about a cool design. So
Yes, absolutely. And I agree that the desire towards some sort of evidence-based design has been increasing. I think part of that is to, in my mind, it's really to convince the public, not to convince architects. I think we've known all along the power of architecture. And so I think now is the time, and now we're trying to really make that convincing argument, um, and perhaps a business argument, which is not how my mind works, but I understand how important it is in order for this type of work to be implemented into building projects moving forward. It just needs to be. And I think to get more people on board with that idea, we have to um, take it from different angles, and part of that is here to show the research evidence. But I think you're right. Also, the importance of the qualitative part of it as well is that we have to understand people's lived experience and how does that align with what we know about the brain and about health and well-being and how architecture plays a role in that.
how would you describe, in simple terms for the audience, how the cognitive mechanisms that shape how different people perceive, think about, and move through space are connected to the way we design and experience architecture?
That's a great question. I think so. Our I think maybe I'll start off with the kind of simple idea, which I think many people are quite aware of, is J.J. Gibson's idea of affordances. And so the idea here is that um, things or aspects of the environment can afford particular actions. And this is uh, predicated on the idea that we're assuming that perception is for action, that the reason why we perceive anything is so that we can act upon it. And the idea of affordances is that not only does the environment have to um, allow us to do particular actions, but also our bodies have to allow us to do those actions as well. And so opening can afford passing through only if it's wide enough and our body is narrow enough to pass through it. And so it's a relationship that where it involves both our body and our mind in making decisions or having a understanding of space, and that the physical space itself is also able to um, meet our body restrictions, right? So sometimes openings are not wide enough for us to pass through, and so they are becomes more of a containment rather than a threshold, and so these kind of simple ideas about the relationship of the body and mind to the environment, we can start to see how these how important it is to understand not only how the brain is processing spatial understanding, but or spatial um, cues, but that also it's important to know and understand how we understand our bodies. What is our kind of body schema, and how does that might affect the ways that we think about, the ways that we can act on, the ways that we can um, understand space.
Maybe we can also, like, we can help them be aware that feeling comfortable in a space and feeling that we are ourselves in a space uh, supported by the design that we are sitting in. To be aware that when we don't feel aligned or we don't feel well, it's not that just you're lunatic or you have mood issues. It's that sometimes the design what we design, what we're offering you to sit in for hours is not aligning with your biology, with your nature as humans. So it's okay to feel bad and to understand that maybe if we change a place, maybe you get better. It's just changing place. You don't have any issues.
Yes, um there's something that um so I had been reading this book called Ideas, Arrangements, Effects. It's about systems design and social justice. It's by this group. I think they're called the Design Studio for Social Intervention, and they're an artist collective that talks about design and the ways that um, we organize space and how that affects how we think about what we're doing within that space. And I think a really kind of profound um, argument that they made, which I just think about all the time, is the idea of when do we decide that sitting was the best way of learning? In pretty much all of our education spaces or learning environments, we sit. And so and that if we think about that developmentally for children, um, they're not meant to sit for extended periods of time and be putting forth a level of attention that we would expect adults to have when they're 6 years old. And so the fact that we've accepted as a society that we're supposed to sit in order to learn, that has profoundly affected um, the ways in which we teach, the ways in which we think that we learn best, and it could be contributing to behavioral problems that we might see in schools in terms of you know, students not being able, they're fidgeting and they're needing to run around because that is in their nature, right? That is what they need as a child that is, growing both physically and mentally. And so I think about that all the time when I think um, about the effect of architecture is that we make assumptions about so many things about how people function, and um, and I think we're at a time when we need to ask ourselves whether or not those assumptions are still valid, and um, and if we rethink the ways in which even we um, arrange space. So if we think about the interior architecture of space, um, that that could change very much the ways in which we interact with each other. And they use the classroom as an example because I think it's a really strong example, one that we all have experience with, is that if our classrooms were not seats all facing forward, but were rather circles or other ways that kind of dictated a relationship between the students and the teacher that was more inclusive, that might give a different sense of hierarchy or lack of hierarchy, and would lead to maybe different outcomes of being feeling um, like they could share or they could participate um, in the classroom. And if we kind of expand that towards rethinking all of the spaces that we interact in, I think that's a pretty exciting prospect for architecture and the future of architecture. And where I think there's a lot of things that from neuroscience and from psychology that we can build off of in terms of how we understand how people learn, remember, um, uh,
Even the
talk.
do's and don'ts, like that we learn as patterns for our bodies and our minds. Exactly yesterday. Yesterday, I was giving a lecture about schools and the design of schools. So, and I was talking about the importance, as you were saying, that we have the same seat, the same way to sit for a society. We are building a society, so children from different backgrounds with ADHD, with characters of being like introverts or being more like open, for calm children, the shy children, coming from, backgrounds with different traumas, different tastes of, like, they grew up in different designs of houses, uh, how to behave in these spaces as well, like spaces of their families, and how they do their activities. And so we put them all together and do like one design and one way for everyone. Okay, we understand that we need to have one design for the classroom, but within this classroom, we need to have different spaces for the different mentalities. Maybe brighter space for a certain type of children, some spaces that are designed to rest, some others for people who cannot sit with the crowd, that feel like not very well. And so you see, there must be a diversity within this classroom. And here comes like the importance of understanding to who we are designing also, and target the society we're designing for. We cannot design a classroom for children the same way that we do for young adults.
Absolutely. And I think that consideration is becoming more and more clear as, again, our knowledge about in the sciences increases, and the ways in which we can have that intersect with our practices as architects. I think it's so important to be able to integrate this knowledge that is available to us, but we might not be able to have the time or space within the design process to be able to fully um, consider it. And part of my charge is that I think we need to develop tools that will allow architects to do what they're good at, which is like understand the design, integrate a lot of information. Um, in my mind, I think that it doesn't necessarily make sense for all architects to like understand and read scientific papers, but I think a lot of people would like to be able to integrate the latest research, and we could perhaps be able to do that through other means um, of tools that work within the existing design process, or with um, sheets that experts might put together uh, that help with some of the interpretation of the work, so that um, architects and more designers are able to think about and use this work to I think further our field.
And I was telling them that maybe today you will find what I'm talking about strange, maybe, or how can we design a classroom this way? But within years, maybe this will be the normal design. And they will say, look how your grandparents used to sit in class. And they will find it very strange. Uh, you
Yeah,
were
yeah.
mm, you were saying that not all architects are meant to do research and read papers and apply these findings in an academic way, let's say. But,
Uh,
this is the role of education at the schools of architecture. And you're an associate professor and the director of interdisciplinary studies at the University of Hartford. So, can you tell us more about this experience and how students are interacting with new concepts, and what do you feel that you, as their mentor, or you're like, you inspire them with your content? How can you help them, how can you direct them towards thinking this way, to have more, prevailing architecture that's for humans.
Yes, so I think I was I think very lucky that in my undergraduate experience, I was exposed to interdisciplinary thinking, and it really had such a profound effect on my trajectory, and my approach to architecture, because I realized, you know, our disciplines were created so that they could have shared methodologies, shared ways of understanding, shared ways of when, um, disseminating knowledge, um, shared assumptions about the world and the ways in which they may study a particular question. And that is really useful for building knowledge. But I think that we're at a point where we're seeing, I think, in all disciplines where they are taking interdisciplinary perspectives, because we have to start now, I think, questioning some of the assumptions that and the methodologies that we've been using, because now, instead of helping us grow and develop our knowledge, it's becoming restrictive. And so, when I t- I tell my students, well, a lot of them are psychologists or neuroscientists, uh, and then I integrate architecture into my classes, or I talk about art in my classes. And I think part of it is to say that we can look at the same phenomenon, through different lenses. And the benefit of that is that, it allows us to question, um, the assumptions that we make as scientists. And that leads to, I think, really interesting questions, that lie at the intersection of fields, and that, um, we might be able to kind of better advance our understanding in both fields on about a particular context. And I also feel like the world is an interdisciplinary world, right? We don't primarily um, look at the world through a particular lens anymore. Or even like, as a medical doctor, I think they're looking at other aspects too. They're looking at psychology. They're looking at social work. They're looking at other aspects and seeing people as whole people, right? Whole people that are existing in the world, and it's not just trying to understand, okay, what is the kind of biological basis of your illness, but also thinking about what are those other aspects? What are the social aspects and cultural? What are the psychological that are also, um, potentially contributing to either your illness or your ability to get better, right? If we don't have the support network, for example, to help us, like we see, right, that patients have worse outcomes. Um, and and so, I think this kind of broader view, or this interdisciplinary view of how we practice across all of our disciplines is kind of fundamental to our um, existence today in this society, which is so um, complicated, for many different reasons. And I think for students to be able to, when they're in school, gain the disciplinary understanding so that they can get to the point where they can really benefit um, from interdisciplinary approaches or perspectives, is, I feel like, my role is to get their disciplinary knowledge up to the point where then they can really start questioning it. And I think that's where we're going to find solutions to our most pressing problems of today. Because, well, one, I think the most interesting questions are at those intersections, but also because I think we're we're needing other approaches to solving problems that we've been grappling with for a very long time.
After all, evolution has always been about interdisciplinary perspectives or hybridization, and then we get a result of something, and then this result we blend it with something else, and then we get something new. So it's all about creation and blending points of views and disciplines together. So today, also, architecture cannot be seen through one lens, as you said, especially that the whole of us with our past and our present and our imagination of future is interacting with what we're seeing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I always think about Vitruvius, I think, had said something essentially along those lines, is that it's important for architects to understand all the disciplines, essentially, because it's through that understanding that we can that essentially like create better uh, space. And I think even if then back way back then that there was this sense of architects as being inherently interdisciplinary, um, that hasn't really changed. But um, I think now we're at a point where we um, there's a necessity to be interdisciplinary so that we can accomplish the things that we want to as a field, but and also for the greater good of humanity.
Is that we can offer also more comfort for people in a world full of stress. It's more like we have more responsibilities now. We are more stressed, so we need calmer, something that calms us down. And space and design is helping a lot in this, just to give them some balance to be able to continue and not go through burnouts or not being tired or exhausted, just from being overwhelmed from the amount of information in urban design and urban planning, even like the ways things are, like the configuration and the design of buildings as well. You were appointed the president of the Academy of Neuroscience for Architecture in January 2025. Could you tell us about the significance of this academy, when and why you first became involved, and share a bit about your experience and vision in this leadership role?
Yes, thanks. Yeah, the Academy of Neuroscience for Architecture was founded in 2004, and I
You
was
were
saying,
already with Eberhard.
yes, yeah. So I was working with John Everhard in 2001, and and up until this point when ANFA was started in San Diego, and uh, John had asked me to move to San Diego be- because the academy um, was being inaugurated, and I was a little bit hesitant because my family lives on the East Coast of the United States, and I felt that at that point in my life in 2004, I felt pretty settled in Washington D.C. And so John asked me, "Oh, what what is it that you would need to move to San Diego?" And I thought, okay, well, here's my chance to ask for anything. And I was like, well, I mean, my desire is to teach and be a professor at a university, and of course, I would love to work at the Salk Institute, um, and so I thought these were kind of um, crazy, and we went on our ways, and I thought that was done with that conversation was over with. But about a month later, John came to me and said, "It's done. You're going to teach at the New School of Architecture, and you're going to work at the Salk Institute in Tom Albright's lab. And so, when can you move?" Ew. I was like, bit taken back, of course, and but what an incredibly exciting opportunity for me. And so moved to San Diego, worked at the Salk. I ended up working at Salk for a couple years, doing rotations in different labs there. there and at UCSD, and then and teaching at New School as well. And then I realized I really need to get my own credentials in science so I can answer the questions that I'm interested in, instead of necessarily doing the work of others. And that's when I ended up going back for my PhD. Um, but my relationship with the Academy Neuroscience of Architecture continued during this time in so many different roles. I used to write the newsletter early on, and then through time, I think um, my involvement with AMFA kind of changed as a young person, um, early on at the kind of birth of AMFA. And, at to this point in my career as a professor, I think I've really seen so much change within the academy.
How many were you when it started? How many people were
Uh,
you?
oh, well, there was, I think, the original founders, so John and Allison Whitelaw and Fred Barks and Gil Cook and Tom Albright, and so there was all of these folks who were part of the board, and I was like an administrative assistant essentially for a while, or research assistant. And there was a bunch of people who were like me, who were either architecture students, or architects who were working in science labs. So me and Meredith Benezik and Melissa Farling, um, and um, and Upali Nanda. And then there was people who were neuroscientists and working in architecture, like Eve Edelstein. And so there was this handful of us, and that were doing this work, and we're all, of course, still in the field, which is really exciting. And it's nice to be able to continue to be connected with them, and their great work that they're all doing, and the ways in which they had pursued the connection of neuroscience and architecture. So there was just this group of folks who were doing this type of work, kind of tangentially, like in support of the academy, but um, they were going off and working in these labs to try to get an understanding, and then like implementing that into their own professional careers. Um, I think seeing the academy over time develop and grow, at this point, I my role, I think, as president, um, and as it's coming to a close now, I think I had some lofty goals about kind of reconnecting to, I think, the feelings that we had initially when the academy was first started, the energy um, that John brought to this field, and the ways that he connected people. And so I was really focused this year on trying to build community, to bring more people into our field, to kind of expand the topics and the research and the people that were that are involved in these conversations, particularly through our biennial conference, which we just had in September of 2025. And then also, so building community was a big part of it, and extending the research, I think, was another part of it. And I think that's what we're seeing now. Not through I I'm not going to take credit for the direction of the field, but I will say that I am so excited about the ways in which the field is exponentially expanding right now, and the amount of research that is coming out is tremendous, and the amount of, I think, interest um, and funding that we're finding in this space and job roles is so exciting. Particularly, I think we're the Peterson Foundation has been a huge player in this space. They've been sponsoring a lot of different projects, research projects and otherwise, as well as the Humanize campaign from Heatherwick Studio. They're sponsoring research as well. And so we're seeing money getting infused um, into this field in a very purposeful way, and that is having tremendous effect, I think, in garnering interest from young scientists, young architects, and certainly internationally, the growth of neuroscience and architecture is amazing. I mean, if look at
I found you in 2011, and this is where, this is where I thought of not only thinking of psychology as a field related to architecture, but also to look at how neuroscience bridges like uh, design results. And
yeah,
the good news now, at the end of this year, like I would like to tell all my colleagues and all architects and neuroscientists in the MENA region that we're working toward establishing the MENA chapter for ANFA, and this will help them reach more events and get to know more the field.
we're so excited to work with you and with the establishment of the MENA chapter, and we can't wait for the work that will come out and the support and the community that will be created by the MENA chapter of ANFA. I think it's important for everyone's work to be able to understand kind of the differences, not only culturally, I think the lived experiences across the world. I think that's a huge consideration when we're thinking about um, this work that we're doing, but also thinking about and understanding different building technologies and processes and ways of thinking that are regional and um, site specific, and I think all of those things, climate, um, responsive. I think all of those things really enrich our understanding as architects. To like what I've been saying about questioning assumptions. And I think the same thing in this regard. I think when we design, many times we're thinking about design problems within the scope of what we understand and what we know and what's available to us in terms of materiality and construction processes and the assumptions about how people use space or can use space. And by having, I think, exposure and connection um, regionally and then also globally, I think that helps us expand the ways that we think about architecture in kind of meaningful ways, and also the way that we think about, the way I think about science is um, needs to be influenced by these different perspectives, because to make assumptions about the built environment, it's so different in many different places, and the ways in which people interact with architecture or the relationship with architecture, um, the meaning through which architecture has, culturally within a society is very different and really beautiful. And so, how do we incorporate that into the ways in which we then study it? Yeah.
So we have this interesting complexity between like having the same anatomy as humans. So how do we combine this shared thing that we have? And then when you come to visit something of my culture, you will still as a human interact with it the same way as me. But then we have this added also factor of the cultural interaction with this space. And so interesting to discover how I as a human and then I as a identity, as a social identity, personal identity, cultural identity, um, local identity, regional identity. So all of these identities, how they also blend with this identity. Is there any message or piece of advice you would like to leave with the audience?
I think I have to say I'm very excited about the future of this field. I think and very hopeful. I was speaking with Upalinanda the other day because we've been, in this for such a long time, and that the fact that we are so excited about the the state of this field and the changes that are happening and the work that is happening in this field, I think that is um, phenomenal. I think for any architect that is interested in this field, I would say you don't have to go out and start reading neuroscience papers necessarily, but I think to be curious and to want to understand the ways in which the built environment is affecting um, all of the stakeholders who might use the spaces that you design, the users, the staff, the clients, the funders, and everyone in between. Um, let that curiosity drive um, your work within the field of architecture, and be open to what knowledge you can gain as another um, kind of uh, piece of evidence or another um, strong, convincing um, argument for your client as to why we need to not only integrate this work into our projects. So I think it's important to be able to. I hope we can get to a point where within architecture projects, they are going to integrate research, post occupancy, like just naturally. But I think we have to defend people, right? We have to say, like, our expertise is in understanding not only how to design the built environment to support people and life and thriving, but also our expertise is in understanding human behavior. It is in understanding, um, human well-being, and those things are you can't separate them from the built environment. And so we need to be supportive and involved and integrating um, this work into our lexicon and the ways that we talk about architecture to the public, but also that we're advocating for the built environment in every aspect. So when there's discussions about health, we have to have folks there to advocate for architecture as a component to physical and mental and social health and well-being. When we're um, talking about uh, climate change, we need architects there at the table. So I think I have a great appreciation for the expertise and knowledge of architects, and I hope that um, we are able to leverage that in ways that can only be benefited by neuroscience and psychology research.
Exactly, because we do everything in a design space or the natural environment, but it's a space as well.
Yes, I agree.
Dr. Margaret, thank you so much for this interesting conversation.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thanks for watching us.